Welcome to meeting number 129 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format. I'd like to remind the members to please wait until I recognize you by name before you speak. Now, today we are looking into Bill C-353, the Foreign Hostage Takers Accountability Act. Pursuant to order of reference of Wednesday, June 5th, 2024, the committee is commencing consideration of Bill C-353, again, which relates to Foreign Hostage Takers Accountability Act. I'd now like to welcome Ms. Landsman to the committee. Very grateful that you made the time to be with us today. For your opening remarks, you have 5 minutes, after which we will go to the members for follow-up questions. Ms. Landsman, the floor is yours.
Sounds good. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've seen this movie before, so it's nice to be here. Thanks for my colleagues for welcoming here, and it's certainly an interesting experience sitting on this side of the table and not being able to use my own microphone. I'm here today to tell you about my legislation, C-353, or the Foreign Hostage Takers Accountability Act. And how I think it'll be an important asset for Canada in an uncertain world. And since this bill was introduced, I can confidently say that the world's become a much more dangerous and unstable place. Nations like China, Iran, Russia are more than ever intent on disrupting the global world order and the established balance of powers. And we've seen that in the aggressive invasions like the one in Ukraine or the one perpetrated by Hamas in Israel are on the verge of exploding into regional and global wars. And it's our nation's values of peace and freedom and democracy that are increasingly under siege. And throughout the history of global conflict, hostage-taking has been employed as a tactic that's use is only growing, and I mentioned that in the deliberations in the House on this bill. And we've seen it used predominantly in the Hamas attacks against Israel, even impacting Canadian citizens. And that, of course, came after this bill was introduced, which proves again why its adoption, frankly, I think probably is overdue in this country. And in a time of turmoil, we should do everything possible for Canadians traveling abroad and protect them from hostile states, groups, individuals. And looking at our current law, it's clear that there is a deficiency, and I think more can be done. And that's why I'm here today. So when lives and livelihoods are at stake, the value of comprehensive, up-to-date, modern legislation to prevent and mitigate hostage-taking situations cannot be understated, and this bill provides the much-needed update to fix the existing laws, or at least add to them. It would strengthen our ability to deter, to minimize, and resolve instances of hostage-taking and arbitrary detention in state-to-state relations. And it would increase our power to levy sanctions, support families, and encourage global cooperation. And it would also provide the much-needed assistance to those families of hostages who endure extreme stress while their loved ones remain in captivity abroad. And simply put, it would be a vital tool in the arsenal, helping us to continue to protect the rights of Canadians abroad and support those affected by hostage-taking. So here's what it will not do. Just to make clear, it will not incentivize kidnapping or effective ransom payments to hostile entities. I know that that's been suggested. It will not place too much power in the hands of individual federal ministers, and it will not be rendered redundant by existing legislation. In short, there is a gap between what Canada could say and what Canada could do. And this bill is brought forth with a desire to address the gap and help protect the rights and inherent dignity of Canadians wherever and whenever they might be in danger. Since introducing the bill, I've received questions from colleagues on all sides of the House, and I'll take that for what it's worth, maybe a positive showing the proactive interest in this piece of legislation. And I'm looking forward to addressing some of those questions here and any additional questions that may arise from the testimony today. And while there are frankly, too many people to thank, because these things don't come together on their own. I've got time today to name a few, and I'm grateful for the support of many organizations and individuals, including Secure Canada, the Iranian Justice Collective, Muslims Facing Tomorrow, Hong Kong Watch, Human Rights Action Group, and the Uyghur Rights Advocacy Project. And I hope that it has your support, too, along with those groups. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, MP Landsman. We now go to questions, and I understand, MP Epp, you're first up, and you have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to my colleague, both for being here and for introducing this legislation. 3 main pillars that you're looking to address, and so let's start with the first one. In your opening comments, you talked about a gap. This committee has undertaken a study. We review and we get constant notices about the sanctions that this government is applying. Can you identify a little bit more the gap between our present sanctions legislation and what your bill will do to enhance that, specifically with respect to hostage taking? Okay.
So I know that there are members and others who have raised questions about whether our existing sanctions regimes would be enough, and particularly around both SEMA, the Special Economic Measures Act, and the Magnitsky laws, and they don't specifically address hostage taking, and I think that a dedicated sanctions regime for this particular issue is probably something worth exploring in this country as a deterrent, and to give us even more tools in the arsenal to be able to impose sanctions. It would be dedicated for this particular for this particularly, and I think it meets. I think it does something further, and there are lots of obligations that Canada has under international law, and there are further things that are probably mandated and required from us domestically to address this, and there's a number of articles within the UN Hostage Convention, the International Convention of Suppression of Financing and Terrorism, the United Nations General Assembly Resolution 68276, and the Security Council Resolution 2133. So I think not only does it do something that our sanctions currently doesn't do, it helps us adhere to some of the things that I think we're lackluster on.
Thank you. With respect to the families, obviously it's not just the hostage that's so severely affected, but their families are as well. What is presently not covered for support, and how does your bill enhance the support for families?
Here's the thing. This would legislate a requirement, and I think you have to give kudos to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs that I know that in all consular cases, and particularly in hostage taking, do everything possible to work with the families. But I think there's an additional step, and I think there is probably a legislated solution that would ensure that the minister has an obligation, a legislative requirement, and we can build out better supports for families. Families are often the ones that are kind of held in the balance. The insane media scrutiny that happens around families that end up in the story of all of this. Like, no family is, no regular family. I don't even think an irregular family is built to deal with first of all the very fact that their loved one. That somebody in their family has been either detained or taken hostage, but the fact that the hostages may use that family as a way to influence the media cycle, to turn potentially against the government, I think wrapping your hands around this family and providing support for that family is. I don't think it can be understated, I think, how important it is. And then understanding that family knows the person that has been taken hostage the best, and potentially could be useful in solving the crisis.
Your comments actually lead right into my next question, and you touched on your opening comments. Hostage-taking diplomacy has become the new global currency for terrorists. And it does seem that we are somewhat or maybe considerably ill-prepared for it. Can you even expand a bit more? What will this legislation do that actually help us prepare more for the potential unfortunate reality that we might even see more of this?
So there is an argument that that legislation is not necessarily needed around this, and there was probably that argument in 2001 before some of the anti-terror laws. This is different than terrorism, right? It could be one event. It could be a single moment in time. You saw that with some of the most famous acts of terror in the world, a mass casualty event of some kind. This is like a prolonged way to hold an entire government and an entire country almost hostage on the basis of policy, on the basis of what they say, on the basis of its own citizenship that may turn against a country. I think that this is one of the currencies that is going to be used more and more. In fact, we've seen that it's been used more and more by really, really bad actors in the world to hold countries like this one hostage on the basis of all kinds of things like policy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. So we now go to MP Alghabra. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, Ms. Landsman. Let me start off by saying that I want to give a shout out to our consular team here in Canada and around the world for the work that they do every day. Hundreds of Canadians are being assisted on a daily basis when they find themselves in a difficult situation. And I'll also start off by saying that I do believe there's room to further strengthen and enhance our consular policies, consular services policies. And I take this attempt in good faith at trying to certainly improve our consular services policies. You know, there's always a tension between how much you prescribe policies and how much flexibility you leave for the officials to respond to the unique situation that they're having to deal with. And the questions that I have about this bill is, does it really find that right balance? So I want to start off by asking you that you've included eligible protected persons in here, non-Canadian citizens. You didn't talk about permanent residents, but eligible protected persons. Can you help me understand how would Canada choose which eligible protected persons that this law would apply to?
So it's actually in the section of the Immigration Act, and I think it's 96 subsection 2. 95 subsection 2, and it's eligible protected persons would be individuals within the meaning of that of IRPA, and it specifically refers to people whom refugee protection is conferred upon.
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but I understand what the definition of the word means. I'm asking how would Canada choose which of those, because there are thousands on a daily basis of eligible protected persons around the world that find themselves in a difficult position. Which ones would the Canadian government choose to be
So those
involved
ones who wouldn't be found to be inadmissible.
So everyone who is found not to be inadmissible.
Correct. And
Okay.
all of this legislation by the colleague.
We're used to
using first names. So, MP Alghabra, I should say that you raised a point in your question that about finding the balance, and in this entire piece of legislation, there's nothing prescriptive. It is all up to the minister's discretion. Everywhere where you think it should be a shall, it's actually a may in the legislation. So that entirely falls on the minister and their prerogative to make those decisions.
It's just, as you can imagine, if this law passes, there will be, again, thousands of families around the world who would expect
And it would be the
Canada.
minister's prerogative.
And then, so the second question I have for you is on arbitrary detention and unfair detention. There are also a lot of Canadians that find themselves in detention in countries where there is no due process. There might be some other motives for their detentions, but they may not fully be under the definition of arbitrary detention. Could be unfair detention. Would this new act apply to them?
Well, the definition under this act is pretty clear on arbitrary detention, and the definitions around arbitrary detention are pretty clear in international law. And again, that discretion is to the minister on whether they would want to confer any of these, any of the pieces of legislation, whether it's take care of their families. They would automatically, in terms of, they would have consular services already. And so these pieces of legislation, I think, in the case of arbitrary detention, which is delineated in international law, I think it would give the minister additional capacity to act. So it's not a have to. It's not a must. It is a additional tools in the toolbox.
Sure, and as you can imagine, a lot of these arbitrary detentions are also hard to really figure out because the country that detains an individual doesn't come out and say, this is what we want you to do in return for releasing this individual. So there are a lot of factors that
are not very hard to figure out, and that's where I think the discretion of the minister plays a role.
So how would you respond to a family who has a loved one, a Canadian family who has a loved one who is unfairly detained in another country? They're asking the minister at the time, after this law passes, to apply this law, and then the minister says, sorry, the law doesn't apply to your loved one who's unfairly detained.
Without giving me additional information about the intelligence that you would have about the arrest and the and what is around the arrest, there is a clear definition to arbitrary detention, which is different than getting arrested, let's say, in Mexico because you were at the wrong place in the wrong time, doing the wrong thing with the wrong suitcase in your hand with the wrong people around you. That could be seen as an.
I'm not talking about those cases. I'm talking about people who are unfairly detained.
I think you have to be more specific about the cases, Minister, to see if this would apply. And again, it's the discretion of the minister to say yes or no whether any of these tools would apply to that. So it's not a requirement. It is an additional set of tools. And I think you could see the examples from the U.S. and what they're studying in Australia to eventually potentially adopt this law would suggest that our allies are on board too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
MP Bergeron, you have 6 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, Ms. Landsman, thank you so much for bringing this debate to the table on this very important issue thanks to this bill. I agree with Mr. Alghabra. I believe that consular personnel across, from Canada across the world is doing fantastic work in order to protect Canadians. However, the fact is there's evidence of hostages that were taken, and the situation could have devolved because we had no idea or we didn't know how to manage that situation. So your bill has the advantage of suggesting avenues in order to manage situations in which hostages are taken. In your bill, I see many interesting elements, but there are some that are quite concerning to me. In French, we say that it's like hugging a little bit too tight and you don't feel comfortable. So sometimes there are things that are left out, for example, arbitrary detentions, or maybe we won't be as efficient as we'd like to be with this bill. For example, on the question of ransoms. during second reading on December 1st, 2023, you said that this law would not change Canada's policy of refusing situations where ransoms were asked for. However, this bill would give the Foreign Affairs Minister the power to give a financial reward to anyone who collaborates with Canada if it helps hostages or people who are detained arbitrarily to be released. This element can imply that perhaps we would be open to paying ransoms, and therefore it would put a price, in a way, on the heads of Canadians, and it might be an advantage to hostage takers. Do you not see a potential danger there?
The question, and I think, look, the use of monetary incentives in law enforcement agencies in Western countries is not a new thing. It's used. It's an idea that's used widely by municipal, provincial, federal law enforcement agencies to help solve and prevent crimes all of the time. It's the idea of Crime Stoppers. So we use it domestically already, and there's a 40-year history in the U.S. with the Rewards to Justice program. Now it's much wider than just hostages. So this piece of legislation only tackles one of those pieces in the Rewards to Justice program, and it was an act that was brought in 1984, and it saved countless numbers of lives through the incentive. And again, all of that prerogative, all of that discretionary prerogative is there intended for the minister to use whether they want to use. And I think that there are things that you can put in place to make sure that that's used, whether cases are looked at what level they are looked at, whether they are reported into a committee like this one or on Parliament if a proceed was to be rewarded. I think there are lots of examples from the U.S. and lots of examples in our domestic law enforcement that would give you that would give you some reprieve.
Je trouve votre réponse fort intéressante.
I find your answer interesting. You're comparing hostage-taking abroad to situations here where we have a stronghold on what's happening. However, in foreign countries, the situation is not under our control. Therefore, it is normal to be concerned. This provision establishes that there can be financial compensation, and it might have some adverse effects. In another file in this committee, we studied the opportunity of revealing publicly cases of arbitrary detention. I myself was personally involved in the case of the imprisonment of a Canadian citizen in Saudi Arabia. At that time, it was preferable for that issue to not make any headlines, and we had to work behind the scenes in order to make sure that we made progress on that issue. However, in the case of the two Michaels, we decided to go ahead in a very public way. So don't you think that we should let the government or leave the government some room to decide which strategy would be the best, instead of necessarily revealing publicly the fact that the government could have to pay financial compensation in the future?
I don't think that this legislation actually has anybody negotiating anything in public. I don't think it has it taking it outside of the hard work that our officials do I think that still provides them with the discretion necessary to do their jobs and do them well. I think it puts a bit of onus on the minister to have additional tools in the toolbox to be able to pull on those if needed. And I think the incentivizing
Guys would know that Canada would be ready to
the incentivizing.
to pay.
I think the incentivizing tools are again fully discretionary, and it expands the government's prerogative rather than restricts it. And whether the bad guys know, I think that the bad guys will also know that Canada actually takes care of their citizens and puts some focus on hostage taking, saying that you can't take our guys.
Merci.
MP McPherson.
Or gals.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much for bringing this forward. And I do want to start by echoing some of the comments that have been made from other members of the committee to thank our consular staff for the work that they do in very, very difficult circumstances. MP Landsman, thank you for bringing this bill forward. I agree that Canada needs to do more to address hostage-taking in cases of arbitrary detention. We know that for years, families of hostages have asked for increased communication from the government. They've asked for better resources. They've asked for more support. And I see that this bill attempts to create a requirement for the minister to provide timely information and assistance to families of Canadian nationals who are taken hostage or arbitrarily detained. You know, one area that the NDP have asked Canada to do better on for many years is arbitrary detention. And while arbitrary detention is included in this bill, it's not clear to me whether this would apply to particularly egregious cases, including rendition of Canadians, such as the case of Meher Arar or Hussein Chalil, who is still held in China after many years, or the Canadians held in northeastern Syria, who this government has refused to bring home to face our justice system here. In your view, does this bill apply to those cases? Could you articulate that? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think again, with respect to the minister and the government of the day, I think it's the discretion of the minister, but it's certainly something that we can ask of the minister.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. You know, we are also concerned about the limited resources for criminal investigations in these situations. We've seen this also with enforcement of Canada's sanction regime, that the lack of resources at CBSA, RCMP, and Global Affairs Canada has impacted the effectiveness of our sanction regime. The bill doesn't address the issue of resources to CBSA or the RCMP. Obviously, no bill can address everything, but I'd like to ask you to address that concern and what you believe the government would need to do in order to meet the new standards established in this bill.
Yeah, so I think to your point, given that it's a private member's bill and it already probably requires a royal recommendation, as we heard from the speaker, there's probably a limit to that. But the rewards for justice legislation in the U.S. First of all, it's much bigger. It looks at organized crime, and it's got a ton of administration around it and monetary sort of budgeting within their version of their estimates. But this attempts to work on a small piece of that, and it is going to require some reorganization of resources. But I don't think that it requires anything that Canada doesn't already have in place. I think you can use existing resources within our talented public service, particularly within CBSA, within law enforcement, to reorganize around taking this seriously. And I think it would send a signal around the world that we're serious about this. Given there's a high price tag on a Canadian.
Thank you. The bill does establish the ability to seize any property situated in Canada that is owned or controlled by the foreign entity, state, or national that engaged in hostage-taking or arbitrary detention. So obviously for us, this is a welcome proposal, but we know from experience with Canada's sanction enforcement that the government has very little success in seizing assets of Russian oligarchs and that we have too few resources allocated in this regard. Can you comment again on the lack of resources and what would be required to actually enforce this part of the bill?
Yeah, look, it doesn't necessarily mandate non-state assets, but we've got the JVTA legislation here, which has resulted in hundreds of millions of dollars of seizure of assets. I think I think that's a much bigger issue that doesn't only that doesn't only speak to, I think, the inadequacies in this country on this specific measures, but frankly of all. Like the justice of the Victims of Terror Act is probably underutilized, and because we're under-resourced in the system I think the rewards have been around $700 million in this country, and I can only imagine of all of the cases that didn't see the light of day because of the lack of resources. So that's a much bigger problem that this piece of legislation isn't going to cover. But I agree with you.
Well, and I would just point out, too, that, you compare it to legislation that's been done in the States, and the States has a significantly larger amount of people that are even proportionality-wise that are being used to enforce the sanction regime and other aspects of this legislation. My last question for you: are you open to amendments to your legislation going forward?
Yeah. Look, I'd like to see something passed in this Parliament, despite my actual thought of it being unlikely, that's going to send a signal to the outside world saying that we're taking this seriously, and that if you're going to come after a Canadian, that you better think twice.
It is certainly difficult to get PMBs in the House at the moment, but thank you, Mr. Chair. That's my time.
Thank you. We next go to Mr. Abel-Taif. You have 4 minutes.
Well, thank you, Chair, and thanks to MP Lastman for putting forward this bill in front of the committee and the House at some point. The first job and responsibility of every Canadian government is to protect Canadians everywhere they exist, whether inside or outside Canada. And we have many examples where Canadian governments have stepped up to protect Canadians abroad, and thanks in that case to all the people on the ground that do this tough negotiation and tough work to make sure we get a positive result. The question is, from the past, there was examples of cases that we've experienced. How do you see C-353, if was there at that time, how much different that would have made on the negotiation or on the end result for when hostage is being taken or when Canadian being detained deliberately by any foreign group or foreign player?
I think on the specifics, I'm not necessarily, I can't necessarily speak to it, given that we don't have the intelligence around the cases. Let's say I've been asked a number of times, would this have sped up the case of the 2 Michaels or any such cases? And I think the answer is, if I was to tell you that yes, I think I would, that would be untruthful. But I do think that it adds again tools in the arsenal to be able to potentially do it faster. I think that we do have many examples from the U.S. and obviously some interest from Australia. The Senate is studying a version of this based on this bill to eventually take it to Australian Parliament. So we do know that there are our allies are interested, and we do know that there's been success from the U.S. particularly on their justice on the rewards for justice piece of this. And I don't think that there's anybody can argue, and I'm sure that you'll hear from witnesses in this short study on this bill that will tell you that the family aspect of it is probably the most horrific part of any of this. When you don't just take a country hostage by policy, you don't just take the hostage. You take the entire circle around that person where they are living and breathing this on a daily basis. And unfortunately, over the last year, I've talked to many families who are in that position and who see their government as acting inadequately on it.
I'm sure at the time where you were trying to introduce to bring this idea forward, you probably have reviewed the current legislation and the tools we have, which is probably that was a trigger for you to introduce this. So what do you believe the most significant tool that this bill will be giving the minister or the system, the existing system, to be more effective?
Well, looking at I think looking at all of this is one. I believe that there is an inadequacy here. Like it's very clear. It's very clear that it's a missing piece in our legislation. So what I didn't understand is the argument of redundancy. I think there are lots of international treaties that suggest that we should be doing more. There are lots of people in our midst who have been victim of hostage taking, who have after the fact said that we should do more. There are lots of inadequacies in our own dealings with this as a country. And I think that all three of them are important. We've got to figure out how to incentivize people so they would cooperate with us so we can get our people back as fast as possible. We've got to make sure that we're taking care of families while we do it.
Well, thank you. In how much time? I've got about 30 seconds.
No, you're actually over time.
Oh, okay, thank you.
So we next go to MP Oliphant, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And
4 minutes.
Thank you, Ms. Lansman, for being here. I have absolutely no doubt that this bill is well-intentioned, that your concerns and consideration for people who are taken hostage is real, and that you have exercised compassion and interest in this bill. However, I'm not going to repeat my speech that I made at second reading in the House, but I would commit it to other members' attention, where I outlined what I believe are my personal concerns about this bill, as well as some of the government's concerns about it. Being well-intentioned is not good enough. You yourself in the House said recently, and I quote, "There is a reason that Canada has a long-standing policy of not negotiating with terrorists. It is that it rewards barbarism, and worse, that it provides an incentive for that barbarism to continue and even escalate." I agree with that. My fear is that this bill at its core is deeply flawed, and it actually encourages and promotes such conversation, and it rewards and incentivizes criminal behavior. It also does not distinguish clearly between hostage-taking, where we have a long history of attempting to help families deal with kidnapping, for instance, and our RCMP is quite skilled at this around the world, and state-sponsored terrorism, which is the arbitrary detention of Canadians, and also rewarding of criminal and terrorist organizations. This bill, and we have had much legal analysis, actually enables funding of terrorist organizations. That is illegal in Canada and needs to remain illegal in Canada. My first concern is, do you understand, or could you explain what you see the difference between arbitrary detention and state-to-state relations is and hostage-taking, and where it is?
So I'll answer your first your first comments because I think I attempted to answer them in the speech. Is it naturally that it ends up funding terrorism? Like frankly, I'm going to just disagree with you there. And I think there are many people that disagree. And there's 40 years of legislation in the U.S. that disagrees with your assessment. There is a very successful act in the U.S., and it's the Reward for Justice program. It's been around since 1984, and it's helped save lives. And we are behind the ball. And if you think that we're doing everything as a country to incentivize cooperation with getting our people back, I think you are wrong. And I'm going to say that as many times as possible, because I don't think that you have thought this through. I think that you are repeating talking points that were given to you by the ministry. I think
Point of order. I don't take that, and I would ask the chair to please not allow personal attacks on members of this committee.
All try our best to make sure that we get to the bottom of
So, Mr. Chair,
questions.
so back to my point, I think there is a great deal of accumulated evidence that has led to the successful negotiation from our ally in the U.S. to get their people back quicker. And part of that has been to enlist the help of those with information. And I think that it sends a vital signal.
For that answer. What I would also like to understand is your understanding of Canada's initiative on arbitrary detention, and how our understanding is that in concert cases, of which I have worked on literally hundreds and dealt with families, how you protect the privacy of an individual who may not be in a family situation that is the best family situation. That our consular officials are brilliant at trying to assess the situation. The number one goal is the safety and security of that individual. There are times when a family can help the situation. There are times when it doesn't. We have families that sometimes think an advocacy program will be helpful because they're absolutely stressed. I get it. I have to deal with them on a daily basis. But it isn't always in best interest depending on the country involved. So we have an initiative on arbitrary detention that we have, and I forget the number now, 70-some signatories plus the EU, where we actually cooperate with countries who have different understandings of the country which may have done an arbitrary detention.
Brief response, please.
I'll just say that none of what's in this bill would stop consular officials from doing what they already do, from making those assessments. And again, the minister is given the prerogative whether to use these tools or not. This legislation is an enabling of a toolbox and not an edict.
Thank you. We next go to Mr. Bergeron. You have 2 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Encore une fois.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Once again, Ms. Landsman, I'd like to thank you and congratulate you for bringing this important debate on Canada's response to hostage-taking. I'd like to think that no matter what happens with your bill, this debate will have helped us to make progress on this issue so that we become always more efficient when dealing with this kind of very preoccupying and worrying issue. In the bill, it says that the government would be in a position to take decrees or and be able to communicate with the country which their hostage, the Canadian hostage is. Here's my question. What is in the law currently which is preventing the government from doing what you have provided for in Section 5 of your bill?
We don't have this program currently in place, so the legislation would put that program in place. And there's nothing. We believe that the legislation, in terms of, I think where you're getting at, frankly, is the checks and balances that need to exist. We believe that this legislation, from an administrative law perspective, would be subject to common law, and that judicial oversight on some of these rewards could be applied. That doesn't need to be in the legislation. I think, to answer more broadly your question, there could be criteria put in place for some of these awards to I think quell some of the concerns that you have. Clear criteria. Yeah.
Mais je pense qu'on parle.
It was only for 2 minutes. So we next go to MP McPherson. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you again, MP Landsman. You talked about the horrific impacts on families, and I'm sure you've spent some time speaking to families of hostages. Could you tell us some of the stories that you've heard about their interactions with consular affairs and the support that they've received?
I spent, thanks for the question. I spent some time in a past life working at the Department of Foreign Affairs, and not directly on the consular file unless it became a problematic file for the government. So I've seen some cases of extremely careful and diligent work from consular officials on some of those cases. And I've seen at times where families are banging on the government's door, suggesting that the consular officials weren't in contact. That's not always true, and I think that's a mechanism to get the attention of the government in some cases. I've spent time with foreign hostage families who have had similar experiences. Some cases, the government of the day in that country was attentive to their views, and in some cases, they too were banging down the doors. As somebody who is not involved directly, it's hard to know which one is which.
Yeah. Well, and I guess I have some other questions for you with regards to Clause 22. So you talk about summary information that the Minister of Foreign Affairs would need to table for Parliament. I'd like some more information from you on what that summary information would look like, how we would ensure, regardless of who is the minister, that it is reasonable, and how we're protecting the privacy through that.
So I think there's any number of ways to do it through estimates, whether it's a discretionary fund up to a certain amount, whether it's high-level approval within the ministry. So there's some stuff that is approved at this level. There's some stuff that's approved at that level. I think implementing a reporting requirement would give people would quell some of the concerns around it, and putting it either within discretionary funding or over a certain amount is subject to a judicial review. There's any number of ways to make sure that the minister is doing this properly. If the minister chooses this, remember, this is not a required. This is, again, the discretion of the minister.
Yeah, and
Thank you. Out of time. We next go to Mr. Hoback. Mr. Hoback, you have 4 minutes.
Well, thank you, Chair, and I'd like to thank you, Ms. Lansing, for bringing this forward. I'm just kind of curious. You talked about the Reward for Justice program in the U.S. So if you were an American citizen who was detained abroad and a Canadian citizen detained abroad in the same scenario, what would be the difference in their ability to react versus ours?
So I appreciate the question and where I think you're going, but I don't think that there is any case that would be similar, and I don't think that there is any case that has. There's no like silver bullet for this. I think that this piece of legislation gives, again, additional tools in the arsenal to be able to deal with each situation, again, a case-by-case basis, and give the minister more tools to get people back faster, to make sure that their families are taken care of, and if they so choose, to impose sanctions, so those people come back faster, and we send a signal to other bad actors saying it's not on for you to take Canadians.
So in this situation, Americans would have more access to tools that would maybe provide a speedier response.
Well, I think over the last 40 years and the success of the program there, I think it's very clear that they've got more tools, but they've got different rules on how they engage in this in the first place.
Fair. No, that's just difference in countries. I'm just kind of curious. We kind of talked a little bit about motivation and what brought this forward. What was the motivation for you to say that we need to do this? Is there anything in particular that you said this is an injustice that needs to be corrected, or?
I think warfare changes. I think if you looked at the last year, I think the 101 hostages that remain in captivity and in the hands of Hamas, despite the fact that this bill was brought before that, I think proves that point in terms of hostage diplomacy being the new global currency on people. And I fear that, like, we should be doing everything. The federal government should be doing everything to protect Canadian citizens wherever and wherever they are. Like, that is the fundamental responsibility. And I think there's a deficiency here, and I really wanted to come to this committee because I like the chair and tell you all about it.
Smart answer.
That's right.
I guess I just come back to that. I'm having a hard time examining the parliamentary secretary. He seems to think that this legislation would actually make things worse, not better. Any analysis that would?
Frankly, I disagree with the assessment. I think that many who you will hear as witnesses will disagree with the assessment. I think 40 years of legislation in the U.S. would disagree with the assessment, and not to take away from anything that the government is doing on this, and particularly our public servants are doing on this. But this is there to not to usurp their role, but to give them additional tools.
It's just hard to explain why they wouldn't accept the new tool.
Sorry?
It's just hard to explain to me or to Canadians why they wouldn't accept a new tool or a new option.
Well, hopefully they do. You have a chance to vote for it, colleague.
Fair enough. I'll stop there, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Fry. We next go to Dr. Fry. Can she hear me? You're on mute, Dr. Fry.
Yes, I am on mute. Thank you. Thank you very much. I want to thank Ms. Landsman for bringing forward the bill. I think all legislation can be amended, can be made better, can be broadened, etc. So this is very important that people try to do this. I have a couple of concerns, well, really questions, because I think one of the things about trying to bring a broad extension of legislation is that there can often be unintended consequences. And my question would be about some of those unintended consequences. For instance, you talk about monetizing access to information from people who know what's going on with regard to the hostage taking or the arbitrary seizure of a person. Tell me, do you know any other countries that do this, that pay a person to give information?
Yes, the U.S. I would assume that given Australian Senate's studying it, that they're looking at ways to do this. But again, it's not a must. It's a may, and again, it is a tool that is discretionary to the minister with a whole lot of checks and balances in place already in law.
Do you think that this could create a lot of false information, a lot of people wanting the monetary incentive to come forward and give misleading information, information that might lead us into another avenue when we should be looking at the way we are looking at it right now in a particular instance? Do you think that that could happen? Because I know that, if you look at all these kidnappings, a simple kidnapping in a country, quite often police are loath to have people go ahead and pay the kidnapper or to try and pay other people for information, because it creates a sort of domino effect of all kinds of people coming forward with false information that could create chaos of some kind.
Well, I think that happens in lots of cases, and in fact, we have generations of law enforcement who I assume, like me, who have full confidence in to do their job, gets information on all kinds of things for monetary reward. In fact, we do it domestically in our own system, provincially, municipally, and at the federal level. And I think that we would trust our authorities and trust the professionals who are on this to make sure that they can decipher between good information and bad information, and any new information that would lead to that person coming home quicker, I think is a good thing.
And that would be so domestically. But what about if it happens internationally? Are you going to be paying people who are bad actors internationally? Is it good optics or even good practice for the Canadian government to pay bad actors to get information internationally from other countries when we don't know much about that person internationally? We don't know if they have other motives. We don't know if they really are terrorists in guise or whatever. I think it's for me, it sounds like a slippery slope. Can you tell me how we can prevent that slippery slope from happening?
Dr. Fry, I think we prevent it every single day, and I think that any information that could help get back a Canadian from being held captive is good information. We should incentivize that information. And again, I trust our authorities to delineate between good information and bad information, the same way that our intelligence agencies do it every single day. This is not different.
Excuse me, Sorry, Ms. Landsman, I don't have a lot of time. I want to get into as many questions as I can. This particular thing is of concern to me because I think you say right now, we do it every day, but you are mandating it. And I think the difference between mandating and allowing decisions to be made by people on the ground who know the issues and who do not agree with a one-size-fits-all solution and can make those decisions, isn't that already happening?
No, I don't think you've read the bill. I'm not mandating anything. We are saying that the minister has the prerogative where she may do that. It's not a mandate. It's not a shall. That's not how the legislation is written. And I'm not sure how to answer your question beyond that.
Well, you have answered it, actually. And I just have to...
Dr. Fry, I'm afraid you're out of time.
Sorry, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That concludes all the questions. Allow me at this point to thank you, Ms. Landsman, for bringing forward this bill. I think I speak on behalf of everyone around this table and indeed in this committee, which is recognizing the good intentions behind this bill, and we look forward to examining it further.
Thanks.
Thank you very, very much.
Thanks to everyone.
Meeting stands adjourned for suspended for 3 minutes. Now we resume our study on Bill C-353. We're very grateful to have before us numerous witnesses who can answer questions for the members. I'd like to welcome from Canada Border Services Agency Mr. Derek Janhovich and Mr. Jeff Robertson, who's the Manager of Inadmissibility Policy. From the Department of Foreign Affairs, Trade and Development, we're grateful to have with us here today Ms. Tara Denham, who's the Assistant Deputy Minister responsible for Emergency Management, Legal and Consular Affairs Branch. We have Ms. Kati Kasaba, the Director General of Consular Affairs Bureau. And we have Mr. Vaskin Kabayan, who's the Acting Executive Director for the Sanctions Policy and Sanctions Outreach, Compliance and Enforcement Division. And from the RCMP, we're grateful to have here with us today Chief Superintendent Mr. Dennis Baudouin, who's the Director General for Federal Policing and National Security. Now, as I understand, Ms. Denham, you are doing opening remarks on behalf of everyone for 5 minutes. So welcome. The floor is yours. And you have 5 minutes, and if you see me holding this up, that means you should really be winding it up within 15 to 20 seconds.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the invitation to be here and to discuss this topic. Let me start by saying that arbitrary detention for diplomatic leverage and hostage-taking by non-state actors are unacceptable violations of human rights. So far in my role as senior official for hostage affairs, I've met with many victims and their loved ones, and I know that the suffering that they endure from this practice is immeasurable and inhumane. Canadians and their families in these horrific circumstances need to know their government is doing everything possible to bring them home and to protect their safety when they travel, work, study, or live abroad. Nous devons toujours mettre l'accent sur le
Our focus must always be on their well-being, so it's essential that we have the right tools to protect and defend them. In analyzing this bill, we asked ourselves 2 main questions. Will this bill help us ensure the well-being of victims, and will it help to ensure the safe and swift release of the victims?
We are in full agreement with the intent of this bill. Our assessment is that by mandating responses across a range of distinct situations with unique considerations does, however, present some unintended yet serious risks to victims and their families. Our assessment is based on significant operational experience in managing cases, our understanding of best practices developed through regular information exchanges with trusted partners and informed by ongoing consultations with survivors and their families, and a comparison to what has been put in place over recent years and lessons learned.
It's important to understand that the types of cases we're discussing today are among the most complex we face and often have important implications for human rights, privacy, international law, intelligence, national security, and public safety.
No 2 cases are alike, and there are important distinctions between arbitrary detention by states, terrorist hostage takings, and kidnaps for ransom by criminal groups, each having different motivations and pressure points. States are usually more sensitive to reputational cost, such as through statements, resolutions, démarches, or coordinated sanctions using existing regimes. Conversely, non-state actors are much less likely to be swayed by tools of international pressure, for example by sanctions, and may be incentivized to engage in more predatory behavior when presented with the possibility of cash rewards or media attention. Nous disposons donc de différents cas.
We therefore have different frameworks for dealing with these different types of hostage taking. We have a very tailored and a nuanced approach to responding to different cases, and we deploy the tools that have proven most effective and least likely to harm victims.
So we always apply a victim-centric approach, which is absolutely essential and cornerstone to the work that we do. So let me provide some details in terms of the considerations related to this bill. First, on assistance to families, I want to reiterate that working closely with families is absolutely critical to the effective management of cases, and we have dedicated contact people for families. We share as much information as we possibly can, while also considering the Privacy Act and the best interest of the victim. Les familles s'efforcent de faire tout.
Families are doing everything in their power to ensure that their loved ones can return home. We do the same. The considerations that come into play in determining when and how to share information are based on our experience and on lessons learned.
Mandatory information sharing, as this bill proposes, could in fact put victims in danger, particularly while cases are active. We have seen situations where sensitive information has been leaked, including families posting details on social media. Information leaks can have many repercussions, including triggering reprisals against the victim or putting negotiations or prosecutions in jeopardy. Mandating the disclosure of personal or sensitive information can also undermine victims' rights to privacy and lead to further traumatization. Family dynamics are also complicated. We have dealt with many consular clients who are estranged from their family members, and hence not all victims are comfortable with having all of their personal information shared. Il nous incombe de respecter
It is our responsibility to respect victims' right to share their information in the way that makes them feel safe, and do so at the time of their choosing.
Facilitating communications between families and captors, we must also be careful. Direct contact could enable captors to further victimize family members. It could jeopardize sensitive negotiations, further endanger the victim and their release, and could even impact future prosecution. En ce qui concerne les offres de
When it comes to offering monetary rewards or incentives to emigrate, many government departments have pointed to significant national security and public safety implications. There is a real risk that these programs will encourage Canadians to be taken hostage.
Offering rewards may also lead to an influx of misinformation that could overwhelm investigations, undermine negotiations, and could also subject the families to false scams, or false hopes. Unfortunately, the people most likely to have information on cases are often those with links to the terrorist or criminal groups who have taken individuals captive. We don't want to inadvertently put public funds in the hands of these bad actors. We want to break the business model. Sanctions, including existing legislation, can also be powerful tools depending on the circumstances, but they are not necessarily helpful in cases of hostage-taking and arbitrary detention. On the contrary, they could trigger reprisals against the victims or other Canadians held by the same captors. Applying sanctions against criminal groups in particular would make any kind of financial dealings by Canadians with them illegal, hamstringing potential efforts that families want to pursue to bring their loved ones home.
Over 2 minutes over. If you could just conclude your remarks.
Excellent. In conclusion, I wish to reiterate that we have a strong suite of policies and procedures in place for dealing with all types of hostage cases and are continuing to refine our approach. We are recognized internationally for our leadership on the Arbitrary Detention Initiative, and we have a team of professional consular affairs around the world who work tirelessly to protect and assist Canadians. I'd welcome the opportunity to answer your questions.
Thank you very much. And we start off with Mr. Chong. You get 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to all our witnesses for appearing. Thank you for your opening statement. I noted that you have concerns about what you call the mandatory responses in the bill. When I read the bill, the only part of the bill that mandates a response is on information sharing, as you've outlined, and your concerns about that. All the rest of the tools in the bill that are provided for to the minister are not mandatory. I look through the bill and it uses the word may, not shall, for all the new powers that the minister would have under the Act. Do you agree with that?
Is it on? Sorry, I couldn't see it. So in our reading of it, yes, our reading is about 50% of it actually does have indications of mandatory, and then underneath where it says this aspect is mandatory, and the following may be tools that could be used to pursue it. So I think that was our interpretation of the proposals. So our concerns remain with the various aspects. Because these are the considerations that would need to be taken into account with regards to anything that would be put in place that may be mandatory. And also what we hope to be able to explain is where some of these approaches are already in place. And so when put in legislation, the impact of that.
Okay. Well, thank you for that answer. One of the criticisms you leveled about the part of the bill that does require the minister to do something is the section of the bill that that the minister should provide, must provide timely information and assistance to families. That I hope that the department's position isn't that the department doesn't have an obligation to provide information to families. Hopefully that's not what the department is suggesting.
No. So to clarify, again, because this is a mandatory element, what we want to very clearly articulate is that, of course, we work very closely with families, and we do want to share as much information as possible. I've met with, and the teams have continued to meet with victims upon their return and meet with families and to learn the best practices possible. But there are key considerations. It's been mentioned previously, but in a lot of these cases, we actually do have intelligence and information that comes forward. A lot of that may come from other countries. And we have to be very careful that any information or intelligence that's shared from other countries is not shared, to the families.
The bill doesn't say you have to provide all information. It simply says you have to provide information and assistance.
Yes.
And so I think there's obviously room for interpretation that would allow the minister and the department to provide information so as not to be injurious to the conduct of international relations or national security and so on and so forth. One of the criticisms you also leveled at the bill was that paying for information may provide perverse incentives. Mm-hmm. I find that somewhat contradictory to present public policy in Canada. We have Crime Stoppers across the country, which police of jurisdictions see as one of the most successful programs. Toronto Police Service last year issued a news release on the Toronto Crime Stoppers program, which pays people for information, and they noted that 6,025 tips and additional 10,536 follow-up tips resulted in a 90% increase in arrests, a 13% increase in charges laid, 113% increase in property seized, and a staggering 394% increase in illegal firearms taken off the streets. So that is paying for information that will allow the authorities to go after people who are doing wrong things. And so that program is seen as overwhelmingly successful across the country, and I'm not understanding the logic of why that wouldn't be successful in the federal context with hostage taking, which is also a violation of international law.
Yeah. So, and again, I believe it was mentioned in the earlier round of questioning, the difference is doing comparators between what happens within Canada and where we do have strong rule of law, justice systems, police that can manage to do those investigations. When we're talking about hostage taking internationally, those same systems cannot be considered to exist, and particularly in the countries.
But you're not getting the information through paying for information to remit to a foreign police of jurisdiction. You're getting it for the purposes of the government of Canada's use. And, as you point out, we're a rule of law country. So I still fail to see why it wouldn't be an appropriate tool for the minister to potentially use in the event of a hostage taking.
But again, the individuals that you'd be paying would be individuals from these countries for which the rule of law, for which we would not be able to engage with a lot of the police of jurisdiction to have that oversight and a lot of the mechanisms that we would have available to us in Canada. I just quickly want to mention there's been reference to the rewards for justice in the U.S. and that it has been in place for a long time. That has been in place since 1984, but it's focused on terrorism, acts of terrorism and information relating to it, foreign interference and malicious cyber. It is only now being considered in cases of hostages, and so we do not have the evidence or the understanding of the impact of that.
Thank you. We next go to MP Chattel. You have 5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président, et merci tout d'abord.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here to talk about this very important issue, and also thank you for your work, because I know it's not easy. There are Canadians and Canadian families who are stuck in absolutely catastrophic situations. There are children and family members who are abroad. I can just imagine how I would feel if it happened to one of my family members, and the pressure I would be putting on our public servants in order to find a solution and bring back my loved ones. So thank you for coming here and for sharing with us the ways that Canada could work better. And in your opening remarks, you talked a lot about collaborating with foreign countries. And I think international cooperation is a key and very powerful tool when we're concerned with when state terrorism is at hand. Here's something that we have spoken about a lot, but that could actually lead to taxpayer money being given to terrorist organizations. What are the measures and elements in this bill that concern you and that might lead to that happening? And would it, for example, I know that we have an alliance with the Five Eyes, and it has some prohibitions. For example, Canada can't give any funds to terrorist organizations. Can you elaborate on that point?
So in terms of the particular concerns around incentives, which was the first part of your question, the specific elements are, as was noted previously, is when you're actually offering rewards for information to be provided. Our analysis is that in the countries for which, unfortunately, the reality is that a lot of these cases happen, the individuals that have that type of information are often close to or have links to the entities that actually have taken individuals captive. And so that's where our concern is, that by offering financial incentives to individuals, you could de facto, or an unintended implication, is that information would go into the hands or into close collaborators, or those close to the organizations that have actually taken individuals captive. When I say that we want to actually break that business model, is because our objective is to always, continually, we don't want to put any financial, obviously illegal to have finances for terrorists, as you noted. We don't want to have any means by which public funds could ever inadvertently end up in the hands of criminal groups or terrorist organizations. And that would be a major concern with the proposal outlined in this bill.
Et ça viendrait en contradiction claire.
And therefore, that would be a clear contradiction Canada has committed with its Five Eyes partners not to do that. Can you expand on the agreement we have with our Five Eyes partners with regards to our own safety?
And I'll welcome other colleagues from the RCMP and others if they'd like to add into any of the agreements that we have with the Five Eyes in terms of the cooperation that we have. But again, there is we do not have any funding of terrorist organizations. That is in our criminal code. There is a recognition that across the Five Eyes that would not be taking place. We've been cooperating for years to sort of break the cycle of terrorism, to not put any actions in place where we could actually endorse or support any acts related to terrorism. And terrorist organizations, unfortunately, have taken Canadians hostages. And so we need to be taking all actions possible to make sure that we do not allow the continuing of those groups to take Canadians hostage. But perhaps I'll pass over to my colleague to speak to any more coordination with the Five Eyes.
All right. No, the only thing I'll say is that we maintain close collaborations with the Five Eyes, but even broader than this, we just co-hosted the negotiating workshop in Washington along with the FBI that was attended by 27 countries. So every country has specific guidelines and everything, but the better the collaboration internationally, the better chance we get to bring our Canadians back home safely. So.
Thank you. Next we go to Mr. Bergeron. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to each of you for being here today, and thank you for everything you do every day to help and support Canadians abroad. I'd like to talk about Ms. Landsman's opening remarks. She made a link between her bill on ransoms and the current legislation in the United States. Ms. Denham, you already started talking about this and you were cut off by time. Would you like to add anything or had you finished answering?
Yes, I was speaking to the Rewards for Justice program that has been cited, and I just wanted to be clear in terms of the history of that program, that yes, it has been in place since 1984, but again, it was introduced as part of their legislation on anti-terrorism. And so it has been used predominantly related to terrorist acts, foreign interference, and malicious cyber. They have only now begun to roll out and consider applying that same approach in circumstances of hostages. And so while our assessment remains in relation to this bill, that we have the considerations that I've outlined and the concerns that we do not inadvertently have information flow into individuals that could be linked to the acts, to the individuals that have taken Canadians captors. That is a significant concern. But we also do not want to inadvertently incentivize that. And so we're always open to learning from best practices. We're constantly in contact with our U.S. colleagues on this, but they're only now rolling this out. And so our analysis remains the same on our concerns, but we will continue to engage with our American colleagues in terms of what are the implications of rolling this out into these particular cases, recognizing the considerations and concerns we've raised.
Sur une question que vous posée.
I'd like to get back to a question that Mr. Chong asked you. He asked you about sharing information and supporting the families of hostages or people who are detained arbitrarily. Speaking from experience, a few years ago, families are sometimes kept in a state of ignorance. Sometimes they feel like the negotiations are happening without their involvement. And sometimes that is actually absolutely necessary, and I have no problem with that. You did mention that you continually are trying to improve the way you communicate with families. With regards to William Sampson, in the early 2000s, for example, would would you say that since then we've managed to implement a way of communicating with the family that is adequate so that they are not ignorant while the life of their loved one is jeopardized?
To be clear, as I started, we always want to share as much information we can. We can all only imagine the heartache that a family is going through, and they want to do everything possible to bring their loved ones home. The differences or the considerations that we put in place, not only are the security ones and intelligence and potential links that I referenced, but we are also taking those considerations as to what and when it should be shared based on all of our collective experience as to the impacts that that could have. And so while I personally can completely understand a family wanting to know everything that's happening, that isn't always in the best interest of the individual. I also mentioned that we also have to respect the privacy. All families are not created equal, unfortunately, and the reality is that some people have circumstances, health issues, situations that happen to them while they are in this horrible situation, and they do not necessarily want to disclose that to their families. We have to let them. We're always working on the assumption that they will come home. So that's our starting point, and I think that's where we always have to focus. In terms of improvements, I think we also have made a lot of improvements. We do have dedicated family contacts for every case that we have. We make sure that we're increasing the training that individuals have. We want to continually ask ourselves and with our colleagues across town and with international partners, what other type of information can we share? Could there be risks? So we're always wanting to share as much as possible, but we have to be careful with all of these other considerations.
C'est tout à fait entendu.
Absolutely agreed.
We will next go to Madame McPherson. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for being here today and answering our questions. I have a few questions that I just want to make sure that I have very clear so I can understand the legislation better. First of all, families of hostages have expressed the need for greater flexibility in paying ransoms without facing prosecution. This issue came up in the study this committee did on consular services several years ago. Since that time, how has the government addressed concerns of worried families about paying ransoms without fear of prosecution? Does this bill address those concerns, or does it, in your opinion, in the government's opinion, create new concerns, including the possibility, and I think we've gone over this, but I'd like you to comment on the possibility of incentivizing hostage taking through the compensation mechanism.
Yeah. So in terms, the government policy remains the same. We do not pay ransom. We do not change policy, any policy positions. In terms of family members, we are also very aware that in certain circumstances, families will want to do everything possible to bring their loved ones home, and that is the choice of the individual family. We do not provide advice on that because our policy on not paying ransom. The concern with applying sanctions, and particularly when in this bill, when it actually it's a blanket, right? It's applying to states, it's applying to terrorist organizations, and it's applying to criminal groups. There are very distinct differences between those groups. And our major concern here, again, we have sanctions regimes in place that we could apply to states. Our concern here is on criminal groups, criminal organized groups. By applying sanctions, that would actually make it illegal. Should Canadians choose to pay ransom on their own decision, it would actually make it illegal for them to do so. The reality is that we have had a number of Canadian families choose that option. That would criminalize that.
Well, and as a mother, I'm sure we all understand we would do anything we possibly could to get our loved ones home, and so we certainly need to be cognizant of that. I also have some concerns about the permit process proposed in the bill. So especially given the long waits that Canadian organizations have faced due to Bill C-41, which established a new process for authorization from the government to do humanitarian and development work in areas controlled by terrorist organizations, such as in Afghanistan under the Taliban. We are well over a year after that bill passed, and the authorization process took a year to even design. It is so complicated that many Canadian organizations are saying that it just simply doesn't work. Then there is the no-fly list process, which, to my understanding, takes up to 6 weeks to get a Canadian travel number. So in these cases where time is of the essence and families would be seeking a permit from the minister to carry out a specific activity restricted under this act, what would the service standards be, and how would the government ensure flexibility in urgent hostage-taking situations? What information would be required from the individual?
So if I understand your question correctly, this is about permits to come into Canada, or
This is the permit process proposed within the bill. So this is to be able to sort of get the carve-outs, I guess.
Sorry, is this? I'm just trying to confirm.
So we're using the example of C-41, which we know was very problematic the way that it was brought forward. It took a very, very long time for the government to come up with the framework with which C-41 would work. The no-fly list is very, very long, that process as well. And what we're wondering is, would we be looking at a long process like that if families wanted to be able to move forward, if they wanted to be able to do things? Would we have that concern?
I'm sorry, I'm not as familiar with some of those requirements. I'm not sure if that would be IRCC that would be more appropriate to ask that question to. I'm not sure if our CBSA colleague has anything to add.
Not in the context of the question being asked. Thank you.
Apologies.
I can speak briefly on the authorization regime. I'm certainly would be not privy to install the program that's in the bill, but you're right that in cases of hostage taking, time is of the essence, and we can't let bureaucracy on the permit to alleviate some of the mechanism that would be put in there. So that's the only concern. The time is really of the essence in these circumstances. So.
Of course, as my examples illustrated, time of the essence doesn't always mean the same thing to the government as it means to the family members. Mr. Chair, I believe I'm at 5 minutes.
Yes, you still have 13 seconds remaining, but thank you.
I cede it.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you. So next we go to Mr. Abel-Taif. You have 4 minutes.
I'll give my time.
We'll go to Mr. Chong.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your testimony. You mentioned in response to Madam McPherson's questions that the official policy of the Government of Canada is not to pay ransom. Has the Government of Canada ever paid ransom?
No, not to my knowledge. That policy has been in place for a number of years. It's no ransom, no policy changes, no prisoner exchanges, and no immunity. And that is the policy of the Government of Canada.
Okay, I appreciate that answer. I'll yield the rest of my time to Mr. Abel-Taif. Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thanks for witnesses for appearing today in front of the committee. Ms. Dunham, you said that we have tailored system, victim-centric, and you said that all cases are complex, just as we know no case or no two cases are alike. And you said also that sanctions are not necessarily helpful. This bill in front of us somehow have a focus on sanctions. The question is, and you also said that we always tailor our policy, we always profile our policy. So when was the last time that you've done any significant change to the policy to cope with the new challenges that we see in this very, very strange and dangerous world? And why wouldn't sanctions be considered as a tool if we know that no two cases are the same and every challenge could be different?
So I'll say a few comments, and just to clarify, are you asking about our change in posture related to sanctions, or are you asking more broadly about how often have we reviewed our approach to consular? Okay.
Yes.
So I'll say a few things, and then my colleague can add on the sanctions specifically. In terms of our reviews on our consular framework and our guidelines that we share with our entire network, we do that on a constant basis, but officially the last one was in 2019. We're actually doing that review again now. So within every couple of years, wanting to make sure that we are integrating the best practices that we are hearing about into the approaches. So I was just over in New Zealand the other week speaking with all of our FAAE colleagues. That was specifically to learn about, again, what are all the best practices? How should we adapt? So again, recognizing that the world is becoming more complex and more dangerous, we're always pushing ourselves to make sure that we understand how others have applied approaches and building it into our framework, our consular framework, and our guidelines that are in place. In terms of sanctions, and again, my colleague may want to add, but sanctions as it applies to these cases, again, when individual Canadians are taken, there's a lot of considerations that we have to put in place, but applying sanctions at a time when you're actually trying to get the individual home can actually undermine that situation. In particular, it could irritate the bilateral relations, should that be in the case of a country that has taken the individual. Criminal groups may not pay attention to sanctions. So I think these are some of the considerations that we have to put in place. But again, I'll ask my colleague to speak more specifically. It will go on. Oh, no. Proceed. Merci.
Thank you. Thank you for that question. We do currently have two autonomous pieces of legislation, the Special Economic Measures Act that has been mentioned before, and the Magnitsky Law, the Justice for Victims of Corrupt Foreign Officials Act, that can, in certain circumstances, be used to sanction individuals, entities, or even states for actions that we believe, after careful consideration and taking a look at the entire situation, they may fall under the circumstances for sanctions, one of them being a gross breach of international peace and security, or a grave breach of international peace and security, a gross and systemic human rights violations, or significant acts of corruption. And I would point out that after the October 7th, 2023 Hamas hostage-taking, we did in fact do that.
Thank you very much. We now go to Mr. Alghabra. You have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon. Thank you for being here this afternoon. I have several concerns about this bill, but one of my biggest concerns is making non-Canadian, non-permanent resident individuals eligible for consular services. Given how stretched our consular services resources are, can you comment on what that could do to the ability to helping other Canadians who might be in a difficult situation?
Sure. I'd like to note 2 things, actually, with that concern related to permanent residents. Most importantly is under the Vienna Convention on Consular Relations, there is no obligation of other states to allow us to provide services to permanent residents. That is not in the Vienna Convention. Therefore, by putting this into legislation, we would raise expectations for which we would be very unlikely to be able to deliver. A lot of the countries for which, again, we're speaking about this concern, they would not recognize Canada's ability. We don't have an ability to actually access permanent residence. In terms of the financial cost, it would be significant. So I was getting the numbers the other day just to give an order of magnitude. There's 8 million permanent residents in Canada. If we look at that globally, and we're adding that to the number of people that we would actually provide consular services to, you can see the orders of magnitude that this would increase. So our consular professionals, while amazing and hardworking all around the world, it absolutely would push not only the consular services teams, but also the teams across the Government of Canada would need to be properly resourced. But it would be an order of magnitude that would be quite significant.
This bill even goes beyond permanent residents. It talks about protected persons. Do we have a sense of how many protected persons or people who fall in that category globally, roughly? Even if you don't have an answer today, can you help us provide this committee a number of what an estimate of an protected persons around the world are?
And again, in the last round, I think there was questions as to how that would exactly be defined. In our analysis, it wasn't clear in terms of how that would be defined, so it would be really hard to give a number. I don't know where that decision, where that definition is and how we could exactly provide a number. If we're able to get that, then we can work on a number as to what that would be.
And I mean, can you imagine the number of Canadian families who have a loved ones also in a difficult situation abroad, how they would feel if the Canadian government paid incentives or rewards for a non-Canadian citizen while their loved ones are stuck in a difficult situation, maybe not a hostage situation. Again, I don't want to take away from the humanity of this difficulty that other people are going through, but the fact of the matter is, and Ms. Landsman herself repeated it multiple times, and I think we all agree, that our government's, the Canadian government's priority is the protection of Canadian citizens at home and abroad. And the introduction of this category in this bill really undermines the government's ability to help Canadian citizens, and it creates a lot of confusion as to who's eligible and who's not eligible. Do you want to comment on that? I know I'm making a statement, but...
Again, we're bound by the Vienna Convention of Consular Relations, and what is proposed, we would actually not be able to fulfill that. There would be very few countries, because of any arrangement we have, because it's not within the Vienna Convention, we would have to have an arrangement in place that they would actually provide access to those permanent residents. And the countries, unfortunately, that we're talking about, that would not be a reality. So it's raising expectations of a large proportion of permanent residents that we would not be able to fulfill.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Bergeron, 2 minutes.
Since I don't have much time, I'm going to ask what I think is the most important question, and maybe I'll move on to a second question. You expressed some misgivings with this bill, which of course has good intentions, but there are elements that might be problematic. In your opinion, is this bill amendable, and can we make it more operational, if you will, for the Department of Foreign Affairs, or would we have to start from scratch?
In our analysis, again, because it starts by saying that this applies to all cases, terrorist, criminal, and states, which are very unique, it starts from a premise to treat all cases the same. So in that, there's a fundamental issue that was really our objective, to raise some of the concerns. There are significant, and I think I've gone through and noted some of the considerations that would have to be taken into account, clause by clause. And so it is our assessment that would actually be quite significant changes that would be required. At the end of the day, we feel we do have the tools available. We need to continue to strengthen the tools. It is not through the legislation that we think that can be done. It is through making sure that we have the resources and the ability to implement the tools that are already available to us.
J'ai encore du temps?
Do I have time left? 20 seconds.
Très rapidement, l'article...
Very briefly, Section 5 of the bill talks about the decrees that could prohibit or restrict certain activities and so on and so forth. Is that not the kind of thing that the government can already do?
Je m'excuse, just be on.
I'm sorry, I'm just confirming.
It's the seizure property.
Oh, assets and seizure, je m'excuse. Vaskin? So I'll hand it to my colleague with the expertise on asset and seizures.
On our current autonomous sanctions measures in CIMA and JVC-FAAE, there are options to be able to seize assets of non-actors, as well as a discussion on state actors as well.
Thank you. And for the last 2 minutes, we go to Madam McPherson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Two quick questions for our guests from RCMP and from CBSA. First of all, we've heard from experts that have spoken about the concerns about the potential misuse of broad powers for targeting individuals. We've certainly seen how other security legislation has impacted minority communities disproportionately over the years, with particular concerns for the Muslim and Arab communities who have felt targeted by Canada's security agencies as a result. How would the RCMP work to prevent the bill's implementation from disproportionately affecting certain communities or from creating, and I quote, suspect communities? And then I'll just do both at once and you guys can answer them. For CBSA, are there mechanisms in place within CBSA to verify the identity of individuals to prevent wrongful designation or inadmissibility under the bill? And how would CBSA handle cases where individuals were incorrectly targeted or require expedited resolution?
I'll try to be quick, but ultimately it would be a response mechanism. The bill is set up that it needs to, an event needs to occur internationally to trigger any use of the powers in the bill. What I'll point out is that the RCMP doesn't gain much on the bill, like it falls under the Minister of Global Affairs. So our powers is, would be limited as the minister would hold much of that new powers. We're part of the task force that tackled this. We play an important role. But again, dealing with families and everything, we have already processes in place, and we remain in close contact with them throughout the incident. So I'll leave it at that so my colleague can further expand.
I'll just start off by saying that there are measures in place that the CBSA does take. I'll pass the mic over to my colleague here who has more operational experience in that area. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. I don't expect the CBSA would have a whole lot of influence in terms of whether or not for the Minister of Foreign Affairs to put a package forward for GIC consideration to impose sanctions. Our role would be to respond to the sanctions having been imposed on a person based on name, date of birth, other biographical details. And so our officials would rely on that biographical information to render an inadmissibility determination. What options are available to immigration officials, perhaps in response to inadmissibility determination? At ports of entry, CBSA officers and in Canada, IRCC officers have discretion to issue temporary resident permits that will authorize temporary residence to people notwithstanding inadmissibility, including an inadmissibility due to sanctions. And this is a regular authority that is at the discretion of officers. We use it every day, I can say. But I don't see a role of the CBSA in determining whether or not to impose sanctions on a person or assessing the merits of that decision. Yeah.
Thank you very much. That concludes our questions. So at this point, I just wanted to thank Mr. Robertson, Mr. Jankovic, Mr. Baudouin, Ms. Denham, Ms. Kasaba, and Mr. Kabayan. Very, very grateful for your time, your expertise, and your perspective. Yes.
Président, je voulais simplement savoir si...
Mr. Chair, I'd simply like to know if we had asked the Foreign Affairs Minister to appear in front of this committee. We just got a notice that she was going to be heading to Montreal for the Council of International Affairs. That's on December 13th. It seems it is more easy for her to attend that event than to come to a public committee. So can we please remind her to appear in front of our committee?
Did you, the clerk, I did check in today. We haven't heard anything back. When did the email go out?
The day that it was discussed.
The day that it was discussed. Okay, understood. Thank you, Mr. Bergeron. And last, if I could ask you all, is it the will of the committee that the proposed supplementary budget in the amount of $5,900 for the study of Bill C-353, Foreign Hostage Takers Accountability Act, be adopted? Yes? Excellent. Meeting stands adjourned.